Hello, this next video in a playlist that I'm calling Combinatorial Results. And this is part 3 of a little mini series I'm doing on Keno Lottery. And here we're looking at the probability and expected awards of the different games. In Keno, there are 3 games. There's what's called Keno Multiplier, Keno Bullseye, and Keno Double Bullseye. Now, Keno Multiplier, when you don't select the multiplier and when you select the multiplier, was parts 1 and 2 respectively. Here we're going to look at Keno Bullseye. So we're going to look at the prizes, the probability of matching a bullseye, the probability of matches, and the expected rewards. And then we'll do a little technical derivation also. So, briefly, how to play: you pick double bullseye, or the bullseye selection. So the money you spend per game is doubled. So if it's a $1 game and you select bullseye, you have to pay $2 per game. You select up to 10 numbers from a list of 80, how many games you want to play and how much money per game you want to play. Then the computer randomly picks a multiplier, randomly chooses 20 numbers, randomly picks 2 bullseyes of the 20 numbers, and then money's awarded based on the number of matches out of n, how much money per game you have bet, the multiplier, and the progressive jackpot bonus. Now, we're only going to talk about the double bullseye, but I do want to show you this table here. This is the awards table for Keno Multiplier. So if you have so many matches out of the in-spot game, so that's how much money you make. These awards also come into play with double bullseye. So I just want to briefly mention that. And then also I want to briefly mention this table of probabilities that we looked at in part 1, which are the probabilities of a match out of a in-spot game that you play. Now I want to point out just one. I'll pick an easy one. So the probability that we match one number in a 10-spot game is 0.1796. And the reason I'm showing you that is these are probabilities of whether you match the bullseye or not. So they're unconditional. And when we look at the bullseye option, it's a conditional probability. So you have to also factor in whether you match the bullseye or not. So it's actually this same probability, but it's split over whether you win the bullseye or not. So let's go down to the bullseye. And as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 ways to win. One, it's the same as Keno Multiplier. So the number of matches, without matching the bullseye, you get the same awards. And the second one is if you match the red bullseye. There's actually 2. There's a red one and a green. But when you play the bullseye option, you're only playing with the red bullseye when it picks it. And these are the awards. And my first note is that you win an award if you match the bullseye. And then it's how many matches in addition to that. Depends upon how big your prize is going to be. Now, one thing that always intrigued me was, what is the probability of matching a bullseye? And these are it. And so in a 10-spot game, you have a 12.5% chance of matching a bullseye. In a 3-spot game, it's a 3.75% chance of matching the bullseye. Now these probabilities are quite easy. It's just n over 80. How many spots you pick, which is n, divided by 80, right? If you have n numbers, and what's the probability that we pick one of those numbers out of 80? Well, it's n out of 80. And the reason I'm showing you this, it's actually a quite simple probability. But when I was showing that if you take the probabilities in the next, well, let me just come back to that. So this is it. So this is the probabilities. So now, if we look at the probability of matches, there's sort of 2 columns for each spot game you play. So in a 10-spot game, you have so many matches, and you did not match the bullseye, so no bull, or you matched the bullseye, and then of course you had additional matches. Notice that when 0 match is always 0, because you can't match the bullseye if you didn't have any numbers matched. So it's always 0 in those cases. But look at this right here. So 10 spot game, match of 1. If we add these two numbers, that's that 0.1796 that we looked at earlier. So you're taking those Keno multiplier probabilities and dividing it into no bull and bull. And then awards are based upon, which side you match on. Now, if we take this column here and add each of those, that's the probability of a bullseye in a game, in a 10 spot game. So technically, let's see if I can do this nice, that should be 0.1250 right here, which is n over 80. So showing that these sum to n over 80 is actually kind of a cool probability that we'll solve at the end of this video. It makes use of what's called Vondermann's identity. Now the expected awards is this. Oh, first of all, we look at the other probabilities for 5 spot down to 1 spot. And so these are it, and I'll pause here for just a second. If you need to pause the video and study it, you can. We're not going to really talk much more about it. Now the expected awards. So this is on average. If you spend $2, because that's the cheapest game we can have, you bet $1, but you select Bullseye, so it's an additional $1. All of these are roughly $1.20, except for the 1 spot game, it's $1.10. But $1.20, so you spend $2, and on average you win $1.20. So that means for every dollar you bet, you win 60 cents. And the thing that's intrigued me, and the people behind Keno Lottery are pretty smart about the way they do this. It actually doesn't matter which game you choose so far. Keno multiplier without the multiplier, Keno multiplier with the multiplier selected, or Keno Bullseye. Your expected award is $1.20 or 60 cents per dollar. Now, so in the long term, there's really no advantage to any one of those games. It's all roughly about $1.20. Although I'm kind of biased to a 6 spot game, Keno multiplier with no multiplier selected. I think of these 3 games, that would be the one that you have the biggest expected return or expected award. Now, the variance associated with these awards in Keno Bullseye is larger than Keno multiplier. So that means on any one game, you could win big. You could win much bigger than if you just were to play Keno multiplier. And so that's kind of enticing right there. But if your long-term strategy, if you have a long-term strategy of playing, lots of games over, months or years, there's no statistical advantage on which game you pick. Now, this column here's the probability of a win. So notice that it's kind of amazing how there's different probabilities. So in a 5 spot game, you have a 14% chance of winning, and a 7% or a 7 spot game, you have a 28% chance of winning. And then the chance in 1 is how many games you expect to play before you win. It's really just the reciprocal of a probability of win. So even though the probabilities are different, the awards given for each match in Bullseye are such that your expected return is 60 cents onto the dollar. Now, let's look at a technical derivation. The next video will be Keno double Bullseye, I mean. So here, this is the probability of matching the Bullseye. So which we said was n over 80, probability of Bullseye. But also, if you sum those probabilities, does that really equal n over 80? And this kind of touches upon that. So if we want to find the probability that ER is 1. Now ER stands for the red eye, or the red bullseye, and if it's a 1, that means we matched at 0 otherwise. Now if we introduce a new variable, which is M, which is the number of matches, and sum it out, sum over all possible values, this probability doesn't change. We go from 1 to N. Now quick question is, why doesn't that go from 0 to N? Because if we have 0 matches, there's no way we can match the bullseye, so that term is 0. So it goes from 1 to N. And then conditional probability, we can rewrite it like this. Now this first probability we looked at in Keno Part 1, and it's the hypergeometric distribution. There's also a different form of that in our derivations, which is this ratio here. So this isn't the hypergeometric form, but it's the equivalent to it. And then here, the probability of matching a red bullseye, given that we know the number of matches and we know how many spots we picked, is I over 20, right? We have 5 matches, for instance, or I matches, I should say. And then there's 20 in the sample that we're picking from, so the probability of a match is I over 20, and that's this piece, this ratio here. Now we start combining. We put the I with this N choose I and the 20 with the 80 choose 20 and rewrite them. And then we factor out anything that doesn't have an I. And then what's left here, this sum of these binomial coefficients, looks pretty crazy. But if you know Vondermann's identity, then this is simply, you add the top, which is 79, add the bottom, which is 19. Those cancel, and we're left with N over M. And that's a kind of a fun proof of that. Now the probability of matches, so the probability we have M matches and we match the bullseye, you can rewrite it into this conditional probability. And this first one is the hypergeometric distribution. And this one, if we know we have M matches, what's the probability of matching the bullseye? It's M over 20. And so that's it. That's the formula you'd use. This one is probably we have M matches and we do not match the bullseye, so you can rewrite it like that. This first probability is the hypergeometric distribution. This second one, the probability we don't match the bullseye, given that we have M matches, so that'd be 20 minus M over 20, and that's it. Now the expected awards is, you take the possible award times its probability summed over all possible combinations. But here there's 2 sets of awards. There's the PI, which is the award when you don't match the bullseye, and RI, which we were calling it's a set of awards when the bullseye's matched. And so it's the standard expected value or expected awards formula for that. Okay, well that's all I have for this video here. The next one will be on Keno double bullseye, and we'll see you then. Hope you enjoyed this. I sure did. Please like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. Thanks. Bye.